Hello and welcome to this online section of HUP 112, Logic and Philosophy. My name is Dr. Richard Brown and I am the instructor for this course. Now these videos are primarily recorded for my Logic and Philosophy course, which I teach at LaGuardia Community College in Queens. This is a hybrid course, which means that it means partially online and partially in the classroom. So we meet 2 days a week, 2 hours a week in the classroom, and then 1 hour a week online. Now, the online component involves using software to do logic exercises and practice. And the software we use is Applia. It comes with the book that we'll use. I'll talk about that in a second. And in the class, then we spend a lot of time doing problems, going over examples, and discussing issues that come up when you actually do logic. Because one thing that you'll discover is that whatever else logic is, it's something that's developed as a skill, which requires a lot of practice and requires a lot of doing it. It's more like riding a bike in that sense than it is like learning history. Memorizing facts is not as useful as just getting out and crashing into things and learning how to keep your balance. So I often say we take the Daniel-san method because I was a child of the 80s and loved The Karate Kid. We'll be doing a lot of repetitive stuff, which seems like waxing on and waxing off, and you may get bored doing that and wonder, why am I doing this waxing on and waxing off, which is a boring repetitive activity. But ultimately, we're developing a skill which is transferable, and it requires this kind of monotonous, repetitive exercise sometimes. Okay, but that's not all that logic is. Logic is, of course, a part of philosophy. It's something that you do philosophy with, and it's something that's interesting in its own right, something that deserves and merits philosophical attention in its own right. And so what I strive to do in the classes that I teach, in the logic classes, is to connect to those deep philosophical issues, because logic brings up questions about the nature of reality, our connection to it, what it means to be rational, which things exist, how do we talk about them. There are many deep and interesting things which arise from the study of logic. Of course, we can't spend too much time on those because we have to master these techniques. There are truth tables, there are tableaus, there are Venn diagrams, there's natural deduction, there's translation exercises. So a lot of it is technical, but there are also super interesting things. So I like to think of it as a forest for the trees type situation. The trees, of course, that's the technicality stuff and formal results. We need to master that stuff. We need to learn a technical language. We need to learn how to speak it, and so that we can communicate coherently about what the problems are. But at the same time, there's the forest, and the forest is incredibly interesting in its own right. So we'll be zooming in and out. Now, at the beginning of a logic class, as I've said, it's a little bit nice to talk about what we'll be doing. In this class, we'll be using the book by Patrick Hurley. It's called Logic, the Essentials. It's a shorter, more concise version of the Hurley book, Concise Introduction to Logic. It excludes a lot of the material which never gets used, at least in my class, never gets used, and is in a paperback. It's cheaper, it's streamlined. I like it a lot. Okay, and it is important to remember that this is a first logic course. This is not an advanced course in logic. This is meant to be an introduction to logic, but nonetheless, as one of my professors used to tell me, there is no shallow end of philosophy. Everywhere that you put your foot into the pool, you're in the deep end. So the same will be true here, even though we will just be doing kiddie logic, and the very first introductory level of kiddie logic, there is no shallow end of the logic pool, and things get very deep very quickly. So we will try to keep our bearings and keep our head above water. Now, the other thing is that there are many approaches to logic and many ways to teach a logic class. I have developed my own approach to these questions, as I have to most things, and most people who do this do. One of the things I like to ask you to think about is, what are we doing when we're doing logic? And one of the ways that I like to answer that question, I'm not going to say it's the right way or the only way, but it's the way that I approach these issues. And the way that I approach this issue is to think of logic as a theoretical endeavor. It's not something that's handed down on high to us. It's not written in stone somewhere. It's something that we have discovered, that we have worked out. And what we're doing when we engage in logic is, according to the way I'll be approaching this class, what we're trying to do is give a theoretical account of something that's in the world, something that's natural and that exists. And so then, by analogy, you might think of the way that a physicist would approach the natural world. A physicist comes to the world and says, aha, there are things moving out there made out of various materials. Let's study them and try to give a theoretical account of what these things are and the way that they work. So what I like to think is that logic is a similar kind of endeavor. It's a theoretical approach to something which exists in the world, and that thing which exists in the world is human reason. So humans engage in reasoning, and I'll say a little bit more about what I mean by reasoning in a second, but we do it every day. You do it, I do it. Sometimes, even when we don't realize we're doing it, we're doing it. So we reason about things, and logic is the attempt to sort of think about what it means to reason and what a reasoning system looks like. So it's closely associated with the notion of deductive proof and deductive reasoning. And for that reason, it's closely associated with mathematics. So when we come to the study of logic, we bring with us already the thing that we're interested in theorizing about, the ability to reason. And this approach, I think, thinking about logic in this way, tends to help us get through some of the difficult areas when we start thinking about why are the truth tables assigned in this manner as opposed to some other manner. And it seems to me that the answer invariably comes back that they are done in that way because we're trying to preserve something which is on a firmer footing. And what the firmer footing, what the thing is simply our ability to reason, which is not a theoretical posit, but rather just something that's out there ordinarily in the world and which we want to understand and capture.